Hello, everyone. You are listening to Scenecraft. From opening shots to long takes and epilogues, we examine our favorite scenes from cinema here on the podcast. I'm Cody, here with my co-hosts,
Mark
and Connor.
You can find Scenecraft on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Scenecraft Podcast for the latest news on the show. Thank you to all of our listeners and social media followers for participating in our first ever Scenecraft poll to decide which movie we are going to be talking about this week. And as a result, today we'll be discussing a scene from the 1975 film Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg. And you can all look forward to more movie polls in the future, so keep an eye out for that. That was very fun to do, so thank you all. But as usual, let's first kick off with our brief What We've Been Watching segment, Quick Takes.
Speak quickly.
Quickly, thank you.
Quickly, come on. Hurry up, quicker.
Way quicker.
Okay, I'll say it fast.
Okay, what have you guys been watching?
So I started last week by watching Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, which, as the title suggests, was directed by Guy Ritchie, and it was released just this year. The logline reads, "During the war in Afghanistan, a local interpreter risks his own life to carry an injured sergeant across miles of grueling terrain." So this may be the biggest surprise for me so far in terms of movies that I've seen. I actually thought Guy Ritchie's The Covenant was fantastic. I could probably go on a 5-minute rant about the weirdness of this movie's title alone.
You were texting about it before, like a few weeks before you saw it. Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's just so bizarre because Guy Ritchie also just released a practically unadvertised movie into theaters a month ago called Operation Fortune.
Mm-hmm.
It had Jason Statham and Aubrey Plaza in it, but I could talk about that as well. But I'll focus on The Covenant for now.
Focus on the good stuff, yeah.
Exactly. So this movie, it shines a light on a story involving interpreters and the dangers they face when they're serving opposing forces. And it actually features probably some of the most tense set pieces I've seen in theaters this year. It walks a really fine line of never feeling jingoistic, but at the same time, I did leave with a greater appreciation for the troops and the hardships they face overseas. And I'll say that even if some of the situations toward the end of the film felt a little manufactured for greater dramatic effect, I'd still recommend Guy Ritchie's The Covenant.
Cool. Glad you liked it.
The second film I saw was The Science of Sleep, which was directed by Michel Gondry in 2006. The logline reads, "A man entranced by his dreams and imagination is love-struck with a French woman and feels he can show her his world." So I've been so curious about this one, and I actually have a very brief but cringeworthy memory associated with this movie. It actually dates back to around the time it was released, and I had just finished seeing a indie rock band play a show. They were called the North Atlantic. And after the concert, I actually was speaking with the lead singer about film and music, and he asked me who my favorite director was. And it was at this moment I panicked and I said the first director that came to mind, and I'm sure everybody's mind, which was Steven Spielberg. And to his credit, he actually didn't bat an eye. He praised my choice, but then he went on to say that he really liked Gondry, and then he proceeded to gush about The Science of Sleep. And so 16 years later, I finally got to see the film. And I'll preface everything by saying that Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is probably my top 10 films of all time. I've seen just about every Charlie Kaufman movie, but I haven't seen too many of Gondry's. And so I always kind of assumed that Kaufman's contributions to Eternal Sunshine's script took center stage. But after seeing The Science of Sleep, I really can appreciate that it was a joint effort, and that this movie was actually his follow-up to Eternal Sunshine.
Oh,
and
okay.
It's pretty strange, but in a delightful way. So it features multiple jumps between the real world and the main character's imagination, with lots of surreal and creative imagery. You can just tell there's a lot of detail in the stop motion visuals and some of the set design. It was just a labor of love. And so I would say the main story is a bit messy, similar to a dream, but I'd say the film largely works due to its originality and textured aesthetic. You won't see too many films like this unless you look at his other filmography, obviously, but
Yeah.
I don't think the focus is on the plot, and I don't think it was an entire home run. There's some really out of place sexual lines of dialogue in this movie that kind of took me out of it at times, but I think there's enough striking imagery here to warrant a recommendation for The Science of Sleep.
I'm so glad you told that story, Mark. How appropriate with our week this week, Spielberg's Jaws.
Yeah, that's actually what inspired me to watch this movie, believe it or not. What have you seen recently, Connor?
So I have been watching Jury Duty and just finished it the other week. It's a new series from Lee Eisenberg and Gene Stupnitsky from 2023, and it follows the inner workings of an American jury trial through the eyes of Ronald Gladden, a juror who is unaware the entire case is fake. Everyone except him is an actor, and everything that happens is carefully planned. So you guys have both seen this, right?
Yeah. Incredible. Just finished it.
So good. Yeah, I can't wait to talk about it a bit more. But for everybody who doesn't know, Eisenberg and Stupnitsky are the writers of some of the most famous episodes of The Office, including two of my favorites, and I think probably everybody's favorites, Scott's Tots and the legendary Dinner Party, which is just my personal favorite of the entire
For
series.
sure.
Yeah.
So I think in a very Truman Show, Joe Schmo show kind of way, the main character of Jury Duty is a random person who is very carefully chosen from, I think, thousands of applicants through a Craigslist ad, and worked with people in his life to kind of set this up in a way that he would be able to go through the entire production without realizing that everything around him is completely fake.
Mm-hmm.
Without giving too much away, there is such a joy in knowing that each one of the players involved, each one of the jurors involved in the case is an actor, and knowing the amount of work that is put into creating this entire fake world for Ronald, and the tiniest decisions that help move him along and ultimately guide him through the case is just such a fun ride. I absolutely loved this, and I would really recommend checking out Jury Duty if you haven't seen it.
That's great.
Yeah, we both loved it.
And going back to kind of the common theme throughout the quick takes, Spielberg obviously related to Jaws, Mark, and and your story there. In this case, it's kind of a story of fun, happy accidents,
Yes,
just
that's
like
great.
Jaws in that
Right.
way, even though they couldn't be, more different. But the end result being this incredible alchemy of all of these elements, and it could have gone so wrong.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were able to come away with this and what is ultimately like a very inspiring,
Mhm.
great show. Yeah, I'm glad you guys liked it. This was so fun.
And shout out to Ronald. I mean, that guy is just great.
Yeah.
What an amazing guy. And
Yeah.
so happy for him.
They struck gold when they picked him.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
really did. So the other thing that I watched this week that I'll talk about is a movie called Under the Silver Lake, directed by David Robert Mitchell, and it came out in 2018. So I know this is a bit of a controversial pick, but the log line for anyone who hasn't seen it is Sam, a disenchanted young man, finds a mysterious woman swimming in the apartment's pool one night. The next morning, she disappears. Sam sets off across LA to find her, and along the way, he uncovers a conspiracy far more bizarre. I think you both have seen this too. Is that right?
Sort of.
I have not.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember Mark talking about it, and I
And you stayed away from it. Yeah.
I stayed away.
Yeah.
I'll just get out of the way and say this was actually one of very few movies that I started but actively chose not to finish.
Yeah, it has a very weird start for anyone who hasn't seen it. And I would just say don't watch it with your family and leave
That
it
was
at
my
that.
mistake, yeah.
I know
that's
that's
what
what happened.
happened. Okay.
That was part
It's
of
one
it,
of
yeah.
those.
So, Cody, to give you a bit of background, Mitchell directed this on the back of the success of It Follows, which I thought had a super inventive and memorable premise, but didn't quite capitalize on its potential. Super stylish, but just didn't kind of follow through and be as cool as it ultimately probably could have been. So, Mitchell put this out after that, and A24 released it super quietly onto video on demand in 2018, and he basically hasn't worked again since. So there's an air of mystique around this film that I find pretty fascinating. It's very divisive. I think the Rotten Tomatoes for it sits at 59% at the time of this show. But I went back and rewatched this, so I was not a fan of this at all the first time, like Mark. And I watched it for the first time a couple of years back. But it's stuck with me ever since, and I think the timing of the movie is really important. It's the director's follow-up to a successful first film, and now, with a bigger budget and more years of experiencing the inner workings of the film industry and the culture machine of Los Angeles, it's essentially a commentary on the disposable treatment of women in Hollywood. So the central character, played by Andrew Garfield, who personally I am not a fan of, Mark, I know you strongly
it's
dislike
irrational.
him.
I don't know what it
agree.
is about
Strong
him. He seems like a
disagree.
very, very
Great
nice
guy.
guy,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
he's obviously talented, but
Yeah.
there's just something about his on-screen persona that doesn't connect with me.
So I usually agree. But in this case, I think it works extremely well for the character. I think it's a perfect casting. And I think his character, Sam, in the film actually mirrors the director coming to terms with creating a successful movie that contributes to the vicious cycle of objectifying women and empowering men to compete with themselves and kind of just perpetuate this cycle of seediness, essentially. And there are so many instances of this throughout the film, which I find pretty fascinating. So I would recommend checking out Under the Silver Lake if you're into, I think we've talked about a couple movies like this so far, but The Big Lebowski, The Long Goodbye, Inherent Vice, these kind of rambling Los Angeles stories that are almost more like a fever dream. And just keep in mind the above when you watch it. If you go in expecting something that is more of a straightforward movie, I think you'll be disappointed. If you're willing to go along for the ride and just see things not necessarily for reinforcing the stigmas that might be shown on screen, but more like questioning them and kind of digging into why they exist in the first place, then I think it's a very interesting and rewarding watch.
So are you suggesting that I go back and finish it?
I think you should give it a shot. Yeah.
Okay.
What about you, Cody? What have you been watching?
I recently finished the first season of Shrinking, created by Bill Lawrence, Jason Segel, and Brett Goldstein, released in January of this year, 2023. The logline is: a grieving therapist starts to break the rules by telling his clients exactly what he thinks. So I had heard a lot about Shrinking right when it was released, and I was deeply concerned that it was going to be some sort of pseudo Ted Lasso show, which I really liked the first season of Ted Lasso, and I didn't want just an approximation of that. And really that's how Shrinking was marketed, especially with the same principal creatives involved in the making of Ted Lasso. And yet I heard such great things from several friends and coworkers, so I finally gave it a try with my wife, and we both absolutely loved it. We just blazed right through it because
Nice.
It is hard to stop watching, and it's a story fueled by grief, so there is some real weight here and a lot of emotion, and yet it has such a universal, pleasant sense of humor. Jason Segel does such a great job in his role. And if you like that kind of Forgetting Sarah Marshall comedy and that vibe that he brings, I think you'll really enjoy this. The show really expertly walks that tonal line between that grief and comedy. And as a result, I would definitely recommend watching the full first season of Shrinking on Apple TV+.
Nice.
Did you guys see this?
I got halfway through and I really love Jessica Williams. She's so funny in it. But just to see her chemistry with Harrison Ford and Jason Segel, it's a really nice trio they have of leads for this.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you didn't finish it?
I think just more shit started, like Succession and Barry, but I did enjoy it. It was pretty good.
Then next up, staying on the Spielbergian theme, I decided to revisit his 1971 TV movie Duel. And the logline for this film is: a business commuter is pursued and terrorized by the malevolent driver of a massive big rig truck. That is such a beautifully simple premise, and it's a beautifully simple TV movie by Spielberg. This was one of his first feature-length projects made before Jaws, which is why I wanted to revisit this and talk about it a bit. I saw it years ago, I think actually in high school film class paired with Jaws. So that is a very cool thing to witness, just this kind of proto precursor to Jaws and treating the antagonist of the film in very much the same way, just kind of this mysterious, shadowy villain that actually ends up making the central conflict all the more interesting. Also seeing like a lot of very similar sound design and effects happening that make its way into Jaws. I think as Bruce the shark is exploding at the end of Jaws, spoiler alert, there's a common sound effect element used between the truck
That's cool.
in Duel and the shark in Jaws. So that was really cool to see. And yeah, this was just a really fun thing to revisit. It's super straightforward, and the way that they're able to capture high speed chase sequences on open highway was really impressive and fascinating. And yeah, this was a TV movie. People have associations with that classification, but it's known as one of the best TV movies of all time. I would definitely recommend checking out Duel by Steven Spielberg, especially if you're going to pair it with a Jaws rewatch.
I always loved that concept. I thought it was just a really brilliant, simple idea.
Mm-hmm.
And there's I think a huge poster for Duel in the new Alamo Draft House in Wrigleyville.
Oh, that's
which it just makes me want to watch it even more.
Nice. Well, thank you guys. Now let's move into our discussion about Steven Spielberg's Jaws, starring Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Dreyfuss, among many others. And as with all of our scene selections, beware of spoilers ahead.
We know all about you, Chief. You don't go in the water at all, do you?
Some bad hat, Harry.
And if you haven't seen it already, the logline for Jaws reads, "When a killer shark unleashes chaos on the beach community of Amity Island, it's up to a local sheriff, a marine biologist, and an old seafarer to hunt down the beast." Jaws, I think, is a film that all of us have seen at least a few times. Would you say that's right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's undeniably one of the most impactful films ever made. I don't think any appreciator of film, of cinema, can argue with that. Its challenging production is legendary, from the bold choice to shoot on an open ocean to a malfunctioning animatronic shark. These hurdles ultimately helped Spielberg shape this movie into what most consider to be a masterpiece.
Yep.
And the film currently sits at number 56 on the American Film Institute's top 100 films. So what did you guys take away from your rewatch?
All right, so I think I'm going to start by saying, has there ever been a film more damning to an animal species than Jaws was for sharks?
Yeah, I can't think of any.
Yeah, I don't think so. But I actually had a blast rewatching Jaws for this episode. And believe it or not, I first saw this movie about 15 years ago. And while it has definitely enough merit on its own, I do think it's important to reflect on the lead up to this film's release, as Cody was alluding to. First off, Spielberg was only in his mid-20s when he filmed this, and he had a single theatrical release under his belt prior to this, and he was nowhere near the household name that he is today. And as Cody also mentioned, the production was notoriously tedious with lots of technical difficulties, and they mostly surrounded the mechanical shark, but also the logistics of shooting, the first major motion picture at sea was obviously a huge undertaking. But I really do like to think that these obstacles ultimately made Spielberg a better filmmaker because it required him to be so resourceful. And as a result, he relied on different camera techniques and John Williams' brilliant score to develop tension. And funny enough, I'm not actually sure how well Jaws would land on younger audiences if it was released today. There's very little gore. There's only a single jump scare, and not to mention the shark is barely in the movie until the last third of its runtime. But I think it's that more deliberate pace that shifts the focus on the characters in such a way that it leads to a really satisfying conclusion. So there's no denying that this film has continued relevance today, as we are indebted to Jaws for the creation of Discovery Channel's Shark Week. For without this movie, we would have been deprived of 7 full days of obscure and redundant shark facts each year.
That's great. Yeah, I don't have too much to add, aside from the fact that I saw this movie for the first time when I was pretty young. So I was in middle school, and I think famously this movie probably should have been rated something more like PG-13 or R.
Mhm.
But at the time, when it came out in 1975, PG-13 was not a rating with the MPAA. And I think they were deciding between R and PG. Ultimately, it went PG, which contributed to the blockbuster success of the film. But due to that technicality, I was allowed to watch it when I was in middle school.
Love a good loophole.
Because it was PG. Yeah. And it was great. It was one of the more first like adult movies that I could see. And it was a tiptoe into like the horror action genre. So super memorable movie. And again, I think really the first true blockbuster film, which is so incredible. Rewatching it again older for this episode just really made me appreciate how many constructs that we've come to know and love in cinema history come from this movie. It was a pioneer of the jump scare. It, has one of the greatest of all time with the
my
head
God.
dropping down, which will probably,
So unexpected.
I did not remember that
yeah.
watching it again this time, and jumped out of my seat. It was like 10:30 at night when I was watching.
So do you guys
Terrifying.
know the story behind that?
No.
So this is great. And I think even better after watching The Fabelmans. I know we all watched that this year. After a test screening of the flick, Spielberg and his crew famously did a reshoot for the Ben Gardner boat scene in a backyard pool. And I think it was editor Verna Field's pool to add the close-up of the dead man and get one more jump scare from the audience. How great is that?
Oh my God.
I remember my dad, he worked at the Lake Geneva movie theater at the time, which was, they only had a few screens. And I think he was in high school when Jaws came out. And I remember he would poke his head in during the jump scare scene because he could hear the whole audience going crazy. So it was just like a very well-known thing.
That's
You
so
knew
cool.
that moment, it just became legendary. But along with that, there are so many great lines, the trading of the scar stories on the boat. I mean, many, many legendary things come from this movie. And the fact that they're all included in a single film is just a testament, again, to what Spielberg and his vision have done for cinema.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it was such a long discussion figuring out which scene to actually
Yeah.
talk about,
Oh.
which we'll get to.
Right.
But the fact that one film can contain so many legendary scenes, it just speaks to the status of this film in popular culture.
Right.
Yeah, and for me, watching Jaws as a kid originally, and then going into my teenage years and watching it again, paired with Duel, was sort of this double-edged sword in a way. The most striking memory to come out of this movie for me as a kid was the first shark attack, and then the discovery of Chrissy's remains on the beach. And I know,
Ugh,
Connor, you
yeah.
had the same visceral reaction, but that has never left my head since
Yeah.
seeing it as a kid. Like that image of these crabs skittering around. It's just so... It's this weird memory thing where watching it again recently, I thought it was going to be a lot more graphic.
Right.
And the shot actually isn't. And that just speaks to the effect of the scene and the choice to have these crabs there and what Spielberg is able to do with that imagery. It actually conjures a much more horrifying graphic thing. But like Mark alluded to, it's not that gory or
Right.
violent necessarily. It's just how effective that sparse imagery is. So that was burned deep into my memory for a long time. More like a hard R horror film for me. And as Connor was talking about, then learning that the MPA actually decided to go with a PG rating because, again, PG-13 hadn't been established until Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, about 9 years after Jaws. I really don't think Jaws is a PG film.
No.
No, definitely not.
No way.
But watching it again as a teenager in film class, the other edge of the sword revealed itself to me, and it was inspiration. I was really inspired by the movie, not only for what was on screen, but all of the mythos and legends behind the scenes. And it was just incredible that this 26-year-old director could break into this industry and create something so structurally simple and yet really thematically complex and technically amazing. And Connor, you were talking about how people usually categorize it as the first ever summer blockbuster. I think the first to ever break 100 million. And it ushered in this new era of filmmaking. So just for that reason, it's crucial.
Yeah.
As we mentioned a few times, the notorious troubled production of the film is very well known, but this cast and crew overcame those challenges, and this film is probably one of the best industry examples of a when life gives you lemons scenario. They all overcame adversity and ended up crafting one of the greatest movies of all time. It's really the perfect marriage of all of the elements of filmmaking, the sight and the sound. And this was such a fun experience to rewatch. All right, well, let's dive into our scene selection for Jaws, which was much debated this week. But we're going to call the scene we're discussing the Empty Raft, which has been lauded as one of the greatest sequences of all time. Connor, do you want to set the scene for us?
Yeah, so at this point in the film, we've already experienced the famous opening skinny dip kill, and the town of Amity has conspired to cover up the death as a boating accident in order to keep the beaches open for summer tourism. Chief Brody, played by Roy Scheider, is skeptical of this, but agrees. The Empty Raft scene takes place on a bright, sunny beach day and sets up the gruesome second shark attack in the film, which is what really drives the story forward toward the pursuit of the great white. This sequence is renowned as a masterclass in suspense because of its union of filmmaking elements, the brilliant blocking and camera movement, paired with a thrilling edit and the perfect use of score and sound.
Before we get into the scene itself, I think another reason why this is a particularly interesting scene is because it kind of parallels a lot of the mismanaging of a public health safety crisis that we've obviously been through somewhat recently. So it felt kind of surreal seeing that depicted back in 1975.
Many people say there are two antagonists of the film, one being the shadowy, mysterious Bruce the Shark, and then one being the bureaucracy of society and of this town, which ultimately caused the attacks. Not necessarily Mother Nature, but bureaucracy.
Well, a callback to Cocaine Bear. Can we really call Bruce the Shark a villain of this movie, right? I mean, he's just doing his thing, and everybody kind of gets in his way. So who's really to blame?
That's true.
Yeah, well said. And this scene is about 5 minutes long in total and starts at about the 13-minute, 30-second mark in the film. And the very first shot in the sequence, which is actually a really impressive one-er shot in its own right, a really long take, begins tracking left on the beach, where we see this large woman walking towards the water for a swim. And in my mind, this is a little bit of a decoy, as the camera's planted on this woman, so you're kind of thinking, this woman could be a shark victim. You know, why are we lingering on her so long?
Yeah.
But then as a part of the same long take, we're introduced to a character playing fetch with his black lab named Pippet.
To go off of what you just said, Cody, after we see that initial gruesome kill at the start of the movie, we start this scene by wondering, okay, who's next, right? And I think Spielberg's kind of playing with the audience by showing you all these potential victims one after another. And so you're just kind of anticipating who the next victim's going to be.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that this man who's playing with his dog is wearing a pale yellow shirt. So we'll see that color come into play throughout the film. It matches the raft that we'll see later on in the scene and a few other items, as well as the yellow shark barrels that are really famously used later on in the film. So yellow just really seems to indicate a sense of looming danger throughout the film, while still appearing as a warm, joyful color. So that disparity creates an air of discomfort and turmoil, and also works on a practical level because, and I didn't know this until doing research for the film, as sharks who are colorblind can actually be attracted to bright shades contrasting against the water.
Yeah, it's interesting, much debated, because it's often said, like, as a diver,
Yeah.
don't wear white or bright colors, even though it's like high visibility for other safety reasons. It can often attract predators and sharks, but then there's part of the community that's like, that's just not true at all. So,
I mean, I could see it for sure, but it's, cool to see how they were using that as a color technique in the film.
yeah.
So the same shot continues, and the dog fetches into the water, and we're introduced to Alex Kintner. He's a local kid who comes out of the water, and it prompts the camera to track back to the right with him. So we start left, then we go right, and we see Alex is wearing these vivid red swim trunks, potentially making him the next victim of the scene, right? So red, it evokes blood and foreshadows what's going to occur.
And as a part of this continuing long take, we next land on Alex's mother, Mrs. Kintner, telling him that he's been in the water so long that his fingers are pruning, but she allows him 10 more minutes back in the water. So already as the viewer, we're starting to get these small pings of dread in the stomach, knowing that that decision by Mrs. Kintner may be fatal, potentially. And just a brief recognition of the actor Lee Fierro,
Oh, yeah.
who played Mrs. Kintner. She lived on Martha's Vineyard for many years and was actually cast in the film and ultimately led to this performance later in the film after this scene, this pivotal moment between she and Brody, which for him is sort of the inciting incident in a way, realizing that he is charged with the protection of this town and its citizens.
Right.
And despite the bureaucracy stopping him, ultimately he feels responsible for what happened. And this incredible performance by Fierro is just something notable there. And just a quick shout out to friends of the show, Tony and Anina, for pointing that out to me. I didn't realize that Fierro was kind of just local extras casting. That's very cool.
Yeah, that is super cool.
It's really neat.
And such a human moment between them
Yeah.
in that scene.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, I also have to just say she shows concern about pruning of his skin. That's just one phenomenon I've never really truly understood. Is there
That's
any
a great point.
Is there any relevance to that whatsoever?
Right. It is an interesting trope because in a lot of movies you see like, you've been in the bath for
Right.
so long, you're pruning.
You're going to turn into a prune. Yeah.
So at this point, we're still in the long take, and Alex walks up the beach and he disappears into a tent to get the raft that we named this whole sequence around. And the camera lands on Chief Brody at this point, who's looking a little brooding, and he's clearly anxious about the people at the beach after that first kill. And this shot of Brody that we've landed on we'll call the master shot of the sequence. The visual language of this long tracking shot is impressive because it primes us as a viewer and instills a sinking feeling that Alex Kintner is being introduced as the next victim. And I think one interesting part about this too is that Brody doesn't look Alex's way, so it kind of shows that he's kind of unaware of his existence and potential trouble he may be facing in the sequence ahead.
So something that's unseen but more felt in this sequence is Spielberg taking inspiration from Hitchcock's work, which we know, obviously a great reference throughout cinema, a big impact on Spielberg's work. With this scene, and really the movie as a whole, it reflects Hitchcock's classic bomb under the table philosophy, with Bruce the Shark acting as his unseen quote unquote ticking bomb in the sequence. So the brilliance and tension comes in with that gap between what the characters know and what we know as the audience, wondering if Alex will really be killed.
So then we finally cut away from this really impressive long take and move into a series of quick edits and shots in the scene. The dog fetches again. Alex jumps into the ocean on his raft, splashing water everywhere. This edit style is particularly effective because of where the cuts are placed after such a long opening shot. And these shots act as Brody's stream of consciousness almost as to what he is seeing on the beach, which is anxiety inducing for him. He cannot possibly protect everyone there.
Yeah.
So then we get this super effective technique where the camera sits on Brody as he just continues to observe the beachgoers. And they all pass in front of the camera and they momentarily obscure the frame. And then the focal length punches in closer on Brody with each passerby. So it's a nice way to disguise the edit,
Hmm.
but also kind of getting closer on his expression as he tries to monitor everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And we see this large woman resting in the water. Then several more times, more people pass in front of the lens. And then we cut back to Brody as we see his body language change. And I think this technique alone speaks to Spielberg's foresight and his tendency for storyboarding and prep. Those passes in front of the camera were very much intentional and were orchestrated to increase the pace and discomfort of the scene. Similar to if we were trying to watch something and we saw a bunch of people passing by us, we would feel that same sort of anxiety.
Yeah. And then this is where we see Harry, the elderly man, wearing a black swim cap, as his head breaches the surface of the water like a dorsal fin of a shark. And
Mhm.
Brody mistakes him for a shark, and we see the panic set in on his face.
This is such great interplay with the audience here, with this bait and switch of giving us all these false
Yeah.
red herrings of,
Yeah.
of the shark.
It's
I love
great.
this part.
Yeah. And then cut back to the original master shot setup with Brody still on the right side of the composition. And a man walks into frame and starts talking at Brody about people illegally parking by his house.
Yeah.
And Brody just can't focus on the conversation. We cut to a dirty single on Brody, shot, reverse shot. And I say dirty single referring to an over the shoulder shot where you get a bit of the subject in the foreground's, shoulder kind of quote, dirtying up the frame a bit. But this is a particularly dirty single where the majority of the guy's shoulder is blocking the shot, and you get Brody kind of peeking out from behind the shoulder, trying to still monitor the water. And this obscuring of Brody's face really ratchets up the tension of the scene even more. I think we've all had that feeling where we're really distracted by something pretty crucial at the moment, and yet we have to multitask while someone is talking at us, and that's so relatable, I think.
Yeah.
That's a great point. So then we cut to this reverse shot of this annoying man's face, and there's this notable split diopter shot where the face and the background are both sharp and in focus, which is very unnatural. We don't normally see this in film, and it gives us this eerie feel that keeps a tension between the foreground and the background. And in a way, it kind of invites the audience to decide,
Yeah.
which one are you going to focus on?
Yeah.
This
Very
technique
true.
was pioneered many years before Jaws, and it was most famously used in Citizen Kane, but supposedly was first used in a 1947 film, Dark Passage,
Oh.
and also used by filmmakers like De Palma and Tarantino.
From here, the young woman in the water begins screaming and Brody leaps upward, but it's another false alarm. The woman is lifted out of the water on her boyfriend's shoulders, just having fun and splashing around, and it really does look like fun. Brody lowers himself down, and we're back to that same master shot setup. But something's changing this time. We're used to seeing background beachgoers, but as Brody's wife, Ellen, starts to talk to him, a big group of kids in the background suddenly get up and migrate toward the water. This breaks up any visual repetition in the master shot and also surprises you with a lot of movement and momentum, signaling to us as the viewer that we're close to the climactic moment of the scene, and that Brody is helpless to control the sheer chaos of the beach. Then cut to the group of kids entering the water.
And then next up, we get Old Man Harry with the swim cap sitting down by Brody, and a bit of dialogue is exchanged, and this reinforces and reminds us of Brody's fear of the water, which is really effective storytelling by Spielberg considering what is about to unfold. And then we also get the snarky line from Brody, "That's some bad hat, Harry." Brody really just despises this hat because of the anxiety it's caused him, popping out of the water looking like a shark fin. Then we get a super quick cut to Brody's kids, Michael and Sean, running toward the water. And Spielberg uses a really long telephoto lens, again, acting as sort of this point of view shot from Brody. It feels almost a bit messy and a little bit chaotic. It's like when we get a small glimpse of something we're trying to track with our eyes, something fast moving. It kind of has that feeling, and again, adds to the fear, adds to the tension and quick momentum of the scene.
Yeah. To go back to one of the things you mentioned, Cody, that there's that one shot where the old man is in the midground and he's the clear distraction. And then we have Brody's head in the foreground of the frame. And then we see the kids in the background. So this, I think, is just a really good use of using all three of those in one shot.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to the fact that Spielberg obviously put a lot of time into storyboarding his sequences so that he gets a lot of visual information in each frame.
Yeah. And to point out two small color things in this scene too, we see the old man using a yellow towel to dry himself.
Oh.
But then also I loved this little Easter egg detail of the flaps of his hat are actually up. So it creates the shape of the dorsal fin on his hat as well. So just a nice reminder that the shark is kind of always present throughout this scene, even though we're not directly seeing them just yet.
So just to inject a very quick thought here related to Old Man Harry. These townspeople frustrate me. And I'm sure they really frustrate Brody in the film. It seems to be kind of like a lot of ignorant people that are accidentally creating these red herring situations. And it reminds me sort of like this one cue on the Jaws score called Promenade, Tourists on the Menu. And it's this the sequence later in the film, almost a montage where tourists are coming onto the island. It's showing them just as sort of these bodies, like this meat for the shark. And Spielberg sort of sets up this theme again of bureaucracy and the fact that Harry is just another one of these people where he's just going about his day, loving life, and Brody is like, I'm watching out for a shark here. And
right.
all these people unknowingly causing this frustration. It's just such a funny thing in the film.
Definitely. And I think Old Man Harry's response to "that's some bad hat" comment really kind of just shows how all the townspeople are in their own little world and completely oblivious as to what's going on.
Yeah.
So at this point, Ellen, who's Brody's wife, attempts to relax him by giving him a shoulder rub. And we harshly cut against this quick, frenetic close-up of the kids in the water, carelessly splashing around. And you really feel the pace of the scene picking up once again. We have these long shots, and now we're getting these quick edits once again. So you get the sense that something feels so unsettling here amidst this fun in the sun beach setting. And then all of a sudden you have these quick cuts of all these people enjoying themselves to support that.
And next up, we see Brody's younger son, Sean, making sandcastles and singing Muffin Man. And this is kind of the sinking stomach moment of the scene. In the background, we see and hear the yellow-shirted man calling for Pippet the dog, who has seemingly gone missing. And then instantly, we can only assume what happened, right? As we see Pippet's fetch stick floating in the ocean. Just such a great cut.
It's a great shot.
Classic Spielberg there. Doesn't necessarily spell out what happened, but we can only assume based on that imagery.
Yeah.
Right.
And I feel like he uses this technique almost the entirety of the movie where he hijacks our brain to kind of do the work for him. You know, we have to put things together. So this is a good example of that.
Yeah. And here we reach the climax of the scene. And like in earlier shots in the film, we're again placed in the underwater point of view of the shark, slowly approaching the dangling legs of Alex Kintner in the water on his raft. And we still have actually not seen the physical shark in the film, only through point of view and obscured shapes so far.
Yeah, there's just something so unsettling and vulnerable about filming people from below underneath the water. You get the sense that they have no idea what's coming. And I mean, it's genuinely probably pretty terrifying when you think about it when you're out in the open water yourself. You have no idea what's swimming around you. So seeing this POV shot is just chilling.
Yeah.
So up until this moment, there has been no film score in the sequence. And the only source music that we have is actually just from the radio. And then we get a general ambiance of people playing on the beach. And it's at this point we finally get to hear John Williams's legendary ostinato shark theme.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know or aren't familiar with the theme, which would be hard to believe at this point because it's so pervasive in pop culture and society, that ostinato theme is the classic dun dun Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, and it's got this visceral, terrifying way of showing the shark POV because as it gets closer, the theme gets a little bit faster as well.
Hmm.
And so as the shark approaches Alex from a POV shot, the music cue is actually called the Empty Raft, which is a haunting name for this piece, and it's
Yeah.
why we called this scene what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, we could dedicate an entire episode or more just
Mhm.
discussing John Williams' score for Jaws.
Yeah.
And in fact, Cody, you turned us on to the soundtrack show, which just does such an incredible job covering this.
Yeah, quick plug for David W. Collins, who
Mhm.
has a podcast called The Soundtrack Show and has a 4-part series on the music of Jaws and points out not just that, dun-dun, but also the other themes of
Mhm.
the film, which aren't covered as much. And it's really, really fascinating. And a lot of it being sort of this pirate swashbuckling adventure
Yeah.
music, which is really unique. And then a lot of sea shanty music covered in there a lot too. It's like you said, Connor, so much could be discussed about just the score and music portion of the film. But for the sake of the scene, it is largely silent and then score really effectively utilized to highlight this shark attack moment.
And going off of that, Cody, one thing that's worth mentioning too is that this theme does not play during any of those previous fake outs, right? So when we see
Right.
Old Man Harry come out of the water, we don't get any music there. So the audience is subconsciously not tipped off that this is the shark that's actually posing a threat.
Yeah.
And we, I think, more famously see this later on when we see the kids playing a prank by creating a fin.
Yeah.
Notoriously, that scene does not use the score either. And so you kind of have this going on in the background. You're not even sure why, but you just don't entirely trust that this is going to actually lead to a shark attack until this moment.
Yeah, it's so smart. And I love how the film plays by its own rules in that sense, utilizing the
Yeah.
score when they include music, when they don't include music. John Williams, just shout out to that guy. He is such a
Genius.
legend.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what distinguishes John Williams as
Yes.
possibly the greatest film composer living, or
Mhm.
maybe of all time, is that what does the story need?
Yes.
Let me spot the film and observe what the story is in the moment, and then adding score to actually creatively enhance the story and film itself, and when to use music, when not to, when to use certain themes to speak to character. He
Right.
just has an inherent understanding of story and character, really distinguishing him as somebody who directly supports the film itself and that collaboration with the filmmaker.
Mhm.
So the music plays us in to one of the most horrific shots in the film. I mean,
Ugh.
this is just a fountain, like an explosion of blood
Disgusting.
erupting from the water. It's really disgusting. And Alex is pulled under by the shark. The moment is accented by a deep, bassy sound effect that adds a highly disturbing texture, I would call it, to the shot. And we then cut back underwater where we see Alex get pulled into the depths, surrounded by bloody water.
Cut to the renowned dolly zoom shot on Brody, very famous,
Mm-hmm.
whose nightmare has been realized after he sees Alex get pulled into the water. In this case, this disorienting visual technique is created by placing the camera on a dolly track and then physically moving the camera in towards Brody, but at the same time using the camera lens to zoom outward. And this creates this kind of displaced, dizzying shock effect. The shot was first popularized in Hitchcock's Vertigo. It's a way of visually representing Brody's worst fear.
Mm-hmm.
As we talked about earlier, it was Brody's responsibility to protect these beachgoers despite all that bureaucracy. And he has failed in this case and will carry that emotional burden through the rest of the film, possibly his lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where he's willing to set aside his phobia of the ocean and hunt down the shark on the orca later in the film. And then also to note, the dolly zoom is accentuated with more amazing John Williams score. coming off of that ostinato shark theme into this strings crescendo, which really highlights this sense of shock and confusion that Brody's experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the tension has already peaked in this scene as the chaos and movement unfolds around Brody. And at this point, the damage is done. There's nothing he can do
Yeah.
except usher the screaming kids out of the water. But because of his debilitating fear, he can't even go in the water to help.
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
interesting shot as he's reacting and leaps upward to go try and help, and he's kind of just at the surface of the shoreline,
Mhm.
Right.
like running horizontally trying to get people out, but he won't go in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that adds to more of the cathartic feel to the ending.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, when he has to swim out of the sinking boat. But going back to the scene, this is when we see the crowd gathering and we get no score at this point. We just get this disquieting sounds of the waves breaking on the beach. And then we see Miss Kintner shouting, "Alex?" And then we cut to this haunting and lingering shot of the tattered yellow raft, and it's just surrounded by blood. End scene.
Yeah. What a haunting final image.
Really, really haunting, and I think just that indelible lasting image of this tattered raft, it's why we called the scene the Empty Raft, because of that
Mhm.
punctuation point right at the end of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we end this sequence, I think it's worth noting that it kind of breaks two of the unsaid rules of cinema, which is never killing a child on screen and then also not killing the dog.
Yeah.
It's just these are kind of shortcuts to
Right.
to really unnerve the audience. And I think I've read in some interviews that because Steven Spielberg was not a father when he was making this film,
Oh,
he felt like he could kind of break those rules, but he said that after he became a father, if tasked with the same scene again, he doesn't know if he could have depicted it in the way that he did in this scene.
yeah. That's a great pickup. I also think it works because they don't actually show the dead bodies, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're just sort of left up to your imagination.
Yeah, as we've been talking about, doesn't necessarily need to be the goriest thing
Right.
ever to elicit this reaction from us as the audience, and that's what he is so great at throughout
Mhm.
his filmography. And what better way to introduce high stakes into the film to say like a child was killed by
Yeah.
Mhm.
this beast, and
Right.
we really need to take this seriously, close down the beach at the cost of the town economy, but it's necessary to do, and it introduces higher stakes into the film.
Definitely.
So yeah, as we're kind of winding down and wrapping up the scene a bit, I wanted to see if upon rewatch you guys had any other thoughts about the film as a whole, and in particular maybe another moment or two that really stuck out to you in terms of another scene or sequence.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So after rewatching it, I think I was most struck by the opening sequence, to be honest.
Mm.
You know, obviously, this movie had a lot of press leading up to it, and a lot of people knew what they were getting themselves into. But on the off chance that you didn't, and you started this movie with all these teenagers around a campfire having fun, it plays like a very different movie to start with. And obviously, we're quickly shaken out of that world and into this creature feature, so to speak, when we see this girl violently killed pretty early on in the film. So that really stuck out to me. And what a way to open a movie for sure.
Right.
For me, upon this rewatch, I think the first couple times seeing the film, so much is focused on the horror elements of the film, but I think watching it this time, I really had a lot more fun with it and realized
Mhm.
how much more like action adventure there is here. And I think one scene I wanted to point out was the barrel sequence later on in the film when
yeah.
they're on the
Mm.
orca trying to track the shark. It's just a great scene, really utilizing the failure of an on-set prop, in this case being this massive Bruce shark, as a way of ultimately creating this really notable visual system of these yellow bright barrels geographically tracking the shark in the water so us as the viewer know where the shark is, can see the speed at which it's moving, can use it as a way of showing the power of the shark, because that shark is not supposed to be able to dive down with a barrel attached.
Right.
And yet it does with 1 barrel, 2 barrels. And it really helpfully illustrates how strong and menacing this shark is and really what they're up against. And if we had just seen mechanical Bruce shark swimming around, it just would not have had the same effect.
Completely. And you get that line from Quint, right, where he's like, never with 3 barrels. Like, you can't do it with 3. Like he's telling us, you know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cody, that's a great point. I think the use of what I kind of think of as surrogates for the shark are just, once again, a really effective way of kind of putting the task on the audience to visualize what the shark looks like without actually showing it.
Yeah. And I think for me, the one thing that really stuck out this rewatch was how they chose to end the film with Bruce, with the shark. It felt like a really poignant send-off in a very respectful, almost like somber tone for the shark. After you get that, I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but after you get Brody shooting the tank and it exploding, he has that moment of celebration, but then you cut to the scene where it just sort of softly, slowly pans through the water. You see the cloud of blood underneath and the shark bits kind of falling to the ocean floor. But it feels like a very respectful send-off for this beast that was unfortunately at the center of this issue with the town.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong here, but I think there's some like high frame rate
Yeah.
camera technique utilized here to really slow down that explosion and settling of the shark in the water. And that fluid slow-mo does exactly that, what you're talking about, Connor. This kind of send-off, this graceful, almost like...
Graceful is a great word.
Putting it to rest in the environment that it should be in, and that we've actually intruded upon. It is a nice send-off.
I think we should move on to the question that the audience is really asking for, which is, who would be Brody, who would be Quint, and who would be Hooper amongst us 3?
Yeah, everyone is clamoring for the answer to that.
They must know.
Yeah, I have my opinions. I don't know if you guys...
Okay. No, go for it.
It's
a tough one.
So I think I'd probably be Hooper.
I could see that.
I see Cody as Quint.
Okay.
And I see Connor as Brody.
I'll take it. Sorry, Cody. R.I.P. to you.
Yeah. No offense, Cody. I had nothing to do about that.
Hey, I have no issue with being a grizzled sea shanty shark hunter. That's
great.
All right. Well, thank you guys for another really fun discussion about this legendary film. I hope we did it justice in some way. It's a really great scene to cover and kind of a masterful, suspenseful sequence, and another great reason why this film will forever live on as one of the greatest films of all time. And we also want to say another thank you to our listeners and fellow movie enthusiasts for reliving this scene with us. Do you have a favorite scene from Jaws? You can email us at contact@scenecraftpodcast.com with any of your thoughts or comments. Or follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Scenecraft Podcast for the latest updates on the show. You can also support the podcast by leaving us a review or star rating on your platform of choice. A very special thanks to Jordan Summerlad for our theme music. This has been Scenecraft, where we break down the craft behind our favorite scenes. See you all next time.